the railways is opening up
Yes,
the
yes, yes. It's
railway
a regular
track
maintenance work.
and putting it aside and
Yes,
letting it
yes.
expand
Yes.
and then putting it back.
Yes, yes.
Classic examples of adaptation to heat. This is a
Yes.
very major subject
Yes,
in the world of disaster, and using the system of counterweights for electrical systems is quite a great.
Yeah, today you are going in for Kavach, your own automatic train protection system. There has to be something protecting a train when it is moving on the track. If you have any obstruction, so automatic train protection is nothing but when you are moving, there is a sensors at the track site. There is a
So this has started getting implemented.
it is started getting implemented. The works are going on rough.
And mostly they were manned barriers. Slowly they became slightly electronic, but still there was a man there.
One good thing around 2019, if I am correct, around 19 or 20,
all unmanned level
crossing
abolished.
were abolished, which we call as interlocking.
Okay.
That means a government aspires, or the railways mission is to remove all level crossing gates. Now the next mission is that we should have complete removal of any level crossing gates. Construct a flyover, or you have to create a subway on both sides of the rocky formations. And there was a challenge in terms of how those attachments to the rocky surface, when you're hanging or attaching a last piece, imagine the kind of wind flow, 300 meters, then you will leave aside everything and pump in coal on a priority to the thermal power station.
So what was that COVID experience?
COVID experience was tough, but I think that was one institution which kept the country's economy alive.
Welcome to the next episode of Risk and Resilience, a podcast which is being done on an invitation we've received from the Policy Perspectives Foundation. So today we have a very interesting guest from the Indian Railway Traffic Service of the 1988 batch. He has recently retired, and he has extensive experience on the running of the Indian Railways, and strangely, he also knows about the history of the Indian Railways and I guess the geography and much more. So to investigate his mind and find out all that he knows about this massive piece of infrastructure that India has, we will be speaking to him. In his illustrious career, he retired basically as general manager of one of the zones in India of the Indian Railways. And he also for 5 years was in an international position. He was the Asia head of the International Union of Railways. Many of us may not know that there is such an international union, but he headed that international union. It has more than 200 members as countries as members. Then he has had great experience in working on high-speed rail. So onwards to Mr. Mukul Mathur. Welcome, Mr. Mathur.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. So we will dive straight in. So can you start with the history of the Indian Railways? You worked a long time. You must have figured out what is the history of the Indian Railways prior to independence. And then later on, you tell us what is it before, after independence.
Say the railways development in this country, pre-independence, it was basically a tool of exploitation by the Britishers. And the history goes back from 1830s, when the discussion started for developing the rail lines. But they were predominantly for some of the construction activities, some dams, some mining project. And thinking started around, and the first rail line, as we know, came in 1853. But by the time the Britishers must have realized the importance of this tool in this country, which had a long geographic reach. And once they had done in 1853, the pace of the development of the railways, you see right from 1850s to 1860, within 10 to 15 years, the small 34-kilometer of stretch which was opened for the first section, which was up to Thane, Mumbai to Thane, 34 kilometers, it got expanded very, very fast. And I was just puzzled when I was going through that, what are the reasons for such a strong growth? Even in 15, 20 years, we are not able to build that kind of an infrastructure, what they had done. Because by 1865 or so, you had the rail lines coming up in Chennai, you had rail lines coming up in Calcutta, you had rail lines coming up near Delhi. But by mid-1860s, the routes was operational. The old Delhi station was in place by 1865 or something like that. So it expanded very fast. And the expansion was through a very, very unique policy, which today we say as public-private partnership, which the Britishers experimented. What they did was they asked the private companies, British companies, to invest in India, build rail lines. And they said that we will assure you a return of 5%. So in 40s, lot of big British companies started investing and they incorporated.
1840s or 1940s?
I'm talking about 1840s.
You're still in the 18th century.
18th
Oh,
century.
wow. 19th century.
Because the GIPR and all those things, Madras Railway, they came up in 1840s and 1850s.
Okay.
And that is how they grew up and made investments. And so it spread very, very fast. The network, and by 1900, the India's rail network was one of the biggest in the world.
India being Bangladesh, Pakistan,
Yes.
everything.
So what had happened was, while it is a good story, but they wanted to have a reach for the military movement. They wanted to connect the Mumbai port. They wanted to connect the Calcutta port, and perhaps that importance and Chennai. So these three locations perhaps were on their priority because of the port. And at that time, the industrial revolution was going on in Britain, and you needed to export and import resources and finished product from there. So it was used as an economic tool for serving the British interest in India. When the Britishers left, subsequent to 1900s, I would say that apart from serving the interests of the British, there were a lot of positives also came up. They came up with the first railway budget because they realized the kind of investment that was being done in this country. They also started the first electric train with DC traction in Mumbai. Mumbai Suburban came up in 1920s and 25. But the problem was when we got independence, the British did not modernize the system because it was serving as to their interest. They were not concerned in the passenger movement or the amenities or the facilities. So when we became independent, post-independence, the focus was completely changed. The network was in disarray because of the partitions. Number of ports, Karachi port went away, Chittagong port went away to Bangladesh. The networks of those railways got truncated. India faced a problem because there were almost more than 40 private entities of the railways. So apart from the unification of the state, the unification of the railways and reorganization was also a challenge. So I would say that right from independence to 50s to 60s was a phase where you had to rehabilitate, you had to reorganize and think that what will be the next steps in terms of how to take it forward. And looking at the organizations that were created by the railways at that point of time, one has to appreciate that we created a self-sufficient model at that point of time. Your rolling stock manufacturing facility came up, ICF in Chennai. You had the Chittaranjan locomotive factory came up. You had DLW came up in 1969.
All these came up after independence?
Yes.
Okay. So there's no manufacturing of rolling stock in India prior to that?
Prior to, except the Jamalpur workshop, which was serving for the maintenance purposes.
There's no manufacturing.
No manufacturing.
So rolling stock, railway track, all of it came imported?
Imported, yes.
Okay.
There may be some forge industry for track and all, I am not aware of it, but mainly locomotives, they were imported at that point. So 50s to 60s was a phase for this reorganization, consolidation, and a rehabilitation. You have to modernize your tracks, you have to modernize your signaling, you have to modernize your coaches, locomotives. All was based on the steam traction. So these three institutions, and also creating at that point of time in 1957 itself, RDSO. That means you were clear that we need to have an institution which will standardize.
What is RDSO?
Research and Development Standards Organization.
Okay.
So you created that organization way back, just after independence, to realize that we need to have a uniform standard in this country for the railways. And that was I would say, looking back, a very big step in 50s and 60s, the decisions taken. If you move ahead from 70s onward, nothing very significant except you were moving ahead on the institutions, those build up, and moving away from the steam traction to the diesel and electric. You started producing your own locomotives. You're not experimenting too much with designs. A diesel engine which was produced, it served the purpose for next 20, 30 years, 40 years for the railways. So not experimenting too much. So it served the purpose in terms of movement of freight and passenger. The same number of employees at that point of time. 1.2 million was the staff strength at that point of time in 50s, which is continuing today.
We are still at 1.2 million.
We are still at 1.2. Of course, in 80s, it had gone up to 1.9 and 1.8. So what I'm saying is that subsequently moving ahead, 80s was, I would say, a very, very remarkable phase. 80s to 90s. That is a time when the railways experimented with something new, modernizing, started creating institutions. Say, Container Corporation came. 70s, accept the IRCON and rights. But in 80s, you started creating much more institution which served the purpose. Concor, I would say, one of the major institutions. You started Shatabdi trains. You propagated Rajdhani trains. So a lot of thrust was lost on the improvement of the passenger amenities as well. Your passenger reservation system came up. You set up the CRIS, which was, I would say, a pioneer in terms of at that point of time.
What is CRIS?
CRIS was basically Center for Railway Information Systems.
Okay.
So one of the few after the independence to procure this center when it came up, it propagated the railways to a stage where it can go in for digitization in a large way. And still they are going it. So I would say that those were a very, very visionary steps in terms of creating such institutions. And when CRIS came up, then only you had opened up this passenger reservation system. I think that our passenger system at that point of time was a pioneer in terms of, because at nowhere in the world you had that kind of a system. Connected network, you can have a reservations from any place to any place. Subsequently moving away towards, I would say, late 90s and say 2000, I would say more of aspirational. That was a phase of aspiration. You experimented. You went into for public-private partnership models. We realized that the safety is critical. So you created a separate fund for that. The government created a fund, Rail Sanraksha Kosh and say RRSK and all those things for improvement of the safety through money channelizing through the diesel cess and giving into the railways for improvement of the safety. So those were works. And subsequently after that, you went into for the aspirational projects of dedicated freight corridors, building those freight corridors. Started thinking of high-speed lines in 2007 and 8, which is going on, the bullet train project with the Japanese government. So these were, I would say, very, very aspirational. Today you are going in for Kavach, your own automatic train protection systems. In 90s and early 2000, you created Retd, which had the largest monetization, I would say, of the optical fiber network that the railways owned at that point.
So this optical fiber was laid for communications of the railways,
yes,
and then used for the rest of the country.
Because when you lay down, you have a spare capacity. And initially, when the telecom revolution also started in this country, many of the big companies did not have the backbone what the railways had. So they used to rely on the network of the railways. They hired those channels.
So the first
for provision of services.
provider of optic cable, fiber cable was railways.
Railways. I don't know who was private, but definitely in late 90s, railways were serving the interest of those because they were passing on the surplus capacity to the railways. In fact, Railtel came much later on. Before that, the railways were doing these kind of things.
I mean, I know you're praising your own service, your railway traffic service and the other services that made up the railways senior officials. But how is all this being done by government organizations? Because everybody says public sector organizations are number one, they don't work. And number two, they say that they're very high cost. But you're telling us that the employees 50, 60, 70 years ago were 1.2 million and they're still 1.2 million. And your track has grown so much and all kinds of things have grown. So how come a public sector organization is
Say
funding
you have
this?
to. I'm not commenting in terms of efficiency vis-a-vis the private organizations in today's context. You look at the context when they were created in 80s and 90s. They were businesses with the railways. Look at catering and tourism. Look at container corporations. They were businesses which were very nascent. Railways were not able to look after those businesses within their own structure. And they realized it and they created an entity. And subsequently, the government disinvested many of them, many of such organizations like RITES, IRCON, and also CONCOR. So what I'm saying is that it allowed the railways to spread the business. Think of CONCOR. The liberalization of the port came in 1991. Now the unit
Liberalization of imports and
port
exports.
sector,
Okay, came in
Now,
91.
when the liberalization of the port started, the growth of the minor ports started taking place, and a private investment in the port sector started coming in. Now, world over, the container is the unit for trade. Now, if you did not had the organization to handle a single agency, before Concor came, you were still handling containers. Indian Railways was handling, but it was really fragmented. You did not had a, it was, did not had a separate tariff structure for containers. You did not realize how the market operates. You did not know how to liaison with the shipping lines, how to liaison with the customs. So you created a separate organization. A separate organization before the privatization of ports. So by the time the port sector got liberalized, you had a matured organization in place. It became an attractive proposition for the private sector to come in and build ports. Because you had, apart from the bulk, you had the interest in terms of that India is growing as a manufacturing post-liberalization. The export has to be done. Import substitution policies were there. So you need an organization to handle container trade. And I think CONCOR has a major role to play. Now, IRCTC today, maybe they are serving almost 15 lakh meals per day. I'm not saying they're perfect. I'm not saying they are serving all taste, everything. There may be private sector organizations doing well, but they see the volume.
So what is the volume of passengers on a daily basis?
On a daily basis, the railways is moving today around 2 crore passengers.
20 million per day.
Per day.
Passengers.
The Australia's population is 2.7 crores.
Okay, and we are moving 22
yes.
for 2 crores.
And this is when we have come down to a level post-COVID. Pre-COVID, around 18, 19, around we were doing slightly more than that. So that kind of a massive movement.
And how many kilometers of track are there?
Today, the route kilometer of the railway is 69,000.
69,000 kilometers.
Route kilometers. So I will go on route, not on the track kilometer.
Okay.
That means the route you are covering is 69,000. So if you look in this perspective that post-independence, whether we have, say there can be questions that whether we have moved that swiftly or not. But what I'm saying is we have moved in a correct direction.
Correct. At times you were consolidating, at times you were redesigning.
Yes.
Like now you're redesigning and moving into high-speed rail.
Yes.
And this Kavach and all these things moving towards safety. So beyond the port and Concor connection, what has been the contribution of Indian Railways to India's economic growth?
So again, on this, when I said this aspirational project, look at high speed or DFC. What they have done is, many of the contracts.
Is high-speed rail and dedicated freight corridor the same thing?
No, they are two different projects.
Please explain.
Dedicated freight corridor project was when the Golden Quadrilateral network of the Indian Railway, that means connecting the 4 metro cities, Delhi, on the west side you have Mumbai, east side Calcutta and Chennai. On this Golden Quadrilateral and its diagonals, the railway, which is constituting 16% of your network, you are moving almost more than 55% of the traffic. So it's a very, very intense traffic movement. On these corridors, around at 2005 and 6, thinking emerged when the government started thinking in terms of the golden quadrilateral on the highways. They thought that perhaps we should think in terms of the railways also. And at that point of time, the dedicated freight corridor concept came into being, that we should build freight corridors along these golden quadrilaterals. And initially, the government said that we will build two of them, one on the eastern side and one on the western side, where you had more traffic, because the eastern side was the mineral dominated area. All the coal mines were there, and the consumption centers were northern hinterland. On the west side, you have the bigger ports. You have Kandla Port, you have Bombay Port, you have Jain Port, Jawaharlal Nehru Port. So you needed to connect the consumption centers with both these things. So government decided that initially in the first phase, we'll connect these two lines through a freight network where only the freight movement will take place. Now, both these corridors have got commissioned. They are functioning fine. And I would say it was a very, very fruitful step for the railways to do that.
Now,
because it has generated a capacity.
Okay.
It has generated
and now, so that's a completely different thing. Yeah. Now, please tell us about high-speed rail.
Why I'm saying is, I'm coming back to the question that what it had done to the economic development. Same thing on the high speed, it is under construction. But what it did was, look at the kind of investments that has gone into the Indian industry. They were Japanese funded project. So the technology on certain items was to be procured from Japan. But the civil construction, bridge, substructures, everything was Indian. Indian company gained expertise on handling big contracts. L&T, Tata Realty.
Big means?
Big means, say, initially, when the railways was doing the contract, they were doing very, very small contracts. If I am issuing a small value tenders, the development of a construction agency, their mindset will be with that tender value in mind. They will not deploy that kind of resources. If I am issuing a 50 crore or 100 crore tender, the industry is not going to expand. When we went into for the engineering procurement contracts, big size contracts, 500 crore, 1000 crores, 700 crores, the ticket size of this contract enhancement means that the big players, the consolidation of small players into big players happened. They invested in technology. When L&T came, they invested hugely in terms of machineries. They have today a big setup in Coimbatore manufacturing, huge machineries, which initially they had to procure from China, but now they are being manufactured. So all these developments, I would say.
So some of the high-speed rail stuff is also started getting made here?
Yes. Today almost more than 350 kilometers of viaduct and civil construction is over. We built 2027, as per the government estimates, in August 27, they are likely to open the first section, which is basically Surat to Vapi.
Okay. And please tell us about this Kavach. What is this Kavach exactly?
Kavach is the automatic train protection system. What the government said was that to improve on the safety performance, there has to be something protecting a train when it is moving on the track. If you have any obstruction ahead of you, it should be able to detect. So automatic train protection is nothing but when you are moving, there is a sensors at the track side. There is which is connected to the satellite. You have a device within the locomotive. All locomotives have to be.
So it'll just take safety to another level. So this has started getting implemented.
It is started getting implemented. The works are going on roughly, I would say, more than 3,000 kilometers.
Okay.
And the government has an ambitious plan to implement this.
So on another safety aspect, when we were small, we used to travel from town to town. So we used to always get stopped with these barriers on the road where the train is passing.
Yes.
And mostly they were manned barriers. Slowly they became slightly electronic, but still there was a man there. So, is there something being done to reduce those number of barriers?
Yes. In long run, one good thing around 2019, if I am correct, around 19 or 20, uh, one of the important milestone that the Indian Railways achieved was they abolished all unmanned level crossing.
All unmanned
Unmanned
level
level
crosses were
crossing
abolished.
from were abolished. Now there is no unmanned level crossing yet on Indian Railways.
Which is there's a
Initially,
man there.
there either a man or a technology has been provided, which we call as interlocking.
Okay.
That means no train can enter into a particular section unless the gate is closed.
Oh, okay.
So that is the technology.
So the gate has to be closed
Closed
first.
before.
Otherwise, the train will have to stop.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so that's very interesting that there's no unmanned crossing anymore. So then the man, I mean, you told us about technology,
Yes.
that integrated
Interlocking.
interlocking technology.
So what the government aspires, or the railways mission is, to remove all level crossing gates. After finishing off with unmanned, now the next mission is that we should have complete removal of any level crossing gates. Now what that will require? Either you have to construct a flyover, or you have to create a subway. These are the two things. So that is being done on a very, very large scale. Initially, just to share with you that how the railways have taken over the responsibility which perhaps the state governments should have done in many of the cases.
But isn't it a central subject?
It is a central subject, but what was happening previously was the construction of the rail, the road over bridges, over the level crossing gate was a very, very problematic. The reason was the approaches to that gate, they were the state land. So the state was mandated to construct the approaches, and over the track portion, the construction was responsibility of the railways. So whenever any such bridge was to be constructed, railway used to construct on their own, and the approaches on both sides used to be done by the state government. So it used to be funded separately. Now, because this was a problem area and the large scale, these kind of bridges or ROBs were not constructed because of the financial issues. Then the railways said that forget about the state government. If you don't have money, if you're not willing, we will construct on our own. When I was general manager in Karnataka, we used to go to the state government and say, tell us kahan banana hai. We will construct it. Don't worry, but at least give us a land.
Mm. Great, excellent. So, with very interesting technical and design and forward movements in the last many years and the last few years. So, let's go to the balance sheet of the Indian Railways. Two, three sub questions. One is, what is the size of the balance sheet as of the last financial year? Number two, what is the cost structure in percentages? And what are the revenue sources?
Say the annual plan now currently, I would go with the current financial year. The annual outlay for the railways is around 2.9 lakh crores. And perhaps this government has realized and putting up a lot of money into two institutions. If you look at the distribution of the roughly capex budget of Government of India, almost 3 lakh crore goes to the highways, and approximately 2.9, 2.7 lakh crore goes to the railways. So annual outlay is 2.9 lakh crore. Central government funds around 2.7 lakh crore to the railways. So that means that's your capex. Government is asking you to build this kind of a infrastructure which will give you a decent return. On the earnings side, you have limitations. Freight is the bread and butter of the railways. So roughly what you are earning is 1.8 lakh crore comes from the freight side. 70,000 roughly comes from the passenger side, so which totals around say 2.5 lakh crores. There's nothing much to play around because your operating ratio is 98%. That means your expenditure, and earning. That means out of 2 crore people that are moving every day on the railways, roughly 1 crore, slightly more than 1 crore, are suburban traffic. Suburban traffic means not metros, but Kolkata, Mumbai, Chennai. These are 3 metro lines of the railways where the traffic is one. Second kind of a traffic is second class mail ordinary, which I say is a general class. If you total these two up, which constitute around 72% of the passenger traffic of the Indian Railways. 72%, that means 72% log. And what is the revenue that you generate is 6%.
So 3/4 of your 2 crore people
Yes,
are suburban and general class, and they are paying 6% of the
6%.
revenue. 6% of the passenger revenue or the total?
Passenger revenue.
Okay.
So you see the lopsided. Because we cannot, I would say, Indian Railways, people say that it's a commercial entity. I'd say it's not a commercial entity. If it would have been a commercial entity, you would not have been having a tariff which is lopsided. Any commercial undertaking would not have it. But it's a social responsibility of the railways as an institution, and that is one of the biggest, I would say, a contribution to the national.
If there's no mobility, how will be their economic growth?
You are today, look at the migrants moving across the country because of this tariff structure. So it's a social obligation. People from Bihar moving towards Rajasthan, moving towards Gujarat. There are now coming up in South, Coimbatore. The industries have developed because of these migrant population moving. And because perhaps the resources not available within the state government. So if the railways start overcharging that kind of category of people, it will have an impact on the national economy. Your 5% of the upper class passengers are contributing more than 50% of the revenue.
Okay. Half the revenue is coming from just 5%.
5%. Rajdhani, Shatabdi, AC classes.
So that is the welfare orientation of the Indian state. There's nothing wrong with it.
Yes.
Yeah. Good. Interesting. So now let's come to a very interesting subject of heat. How does heat impact the railway lines?
I would say that when the railway lines are laid, they have to be supposed to be laid at a particular temperature. But normally, when the construction is going on, you are not able to achieve that kind. So there are concepts like de-stressing, because there are stresses built up in the track because of the temperature variations. So you have to adjust the rail according to the temperatures. So when it has to be de-stressed, either you have to stretch it or you have to cut it for removing the tension in the track. So when these works are being done, you remove all fitting because rail is held by a lot of fittings. So you remove all the fittings. You just leave the rail like naturally.
Before it is finally...
Before it is installed is fine. But say if I have installed in a night time, when the temperature is not available, optimum temperature is not available, which is around say 35 to 40 within that range in India. If I am laying a track in the colder climate, and if the variation is too high, that means the stresses have to be removed at some point of time. So it's a regular exercise. We keep a record of when these stresses have to be removed.
So are you telling me that before the summer season comes in Rajasthan?
Yes.
Every summer,
every summer and every winter, because in winter the rail fractures will be there.
No, wait.
And buckling of track will be there in summers.
Every March, the railways is opening up the
yes.
railway
It's a regular
track
maintenance work
and putting it aside and letting it expand.
Yes.
And then putting it back.
Yes. We keep a record of at what temperature the track is being laid. When they have to be de-stressed, it's available with the engineers. And whenever the de-stressing is due, they have to de-stress the track. Similarly, for the electric equipments, it is not an issue because, say, if you look and when you're traveling, but if you've not noticed, there is a balancing counterweight attached to the wire on the mast. You will see that there is a weight being hung. So that means it is automatic adjustments is done in the tension of the wire, electric wire, because when it expands or contracts, the counterweights keep on moving up and down.
So these are two very classic examples of adaptation to heat. This is a
Yes.
very major subject
Yes,
in the world of disaster mitigation and
Mm.
climate adaptation.
Mm.
And you would become a star if you start speaking at these events on resilient infrastructure, because de-stressing at this scale and using the system of counterweights for electrical systems is quite a great
Yes.
thing. So it's being done for like many decades.
Yes. Yeah. It's a standard practice, and also for the bridges. See, whenever you are constructing a bridge, the mean waterfall in that area is being considered before you are constructing. And what is the kind of water flow? Will go at the highest flow that has gone. It is marked on the pillar. And you have to, in regular maintenance, you have to see whether the pier of a bridge is not being affected by the water flow. The scouring is not happening. So there is it's a in big bridges you have to go underneath the water level also to check. That kind of system exists.
So is there any such technological marvel that we see visually? It's a technological marvel, the bridge that has been made in J&K.
Mhm.
Can you tell us something about that?
I think it is a piece of architecture, and I would only say that I had visited once when it was being constructed. Imagine a bridge which is attached on both sides of the rocky formations. And there was a challenge in terms of how those attachments to the rocky surface was being done. And when they are attached, that means the last piece, when you're hanging or attaching a last piece, imagine the kind of wind flow 300 meters above the water level. When you are hanging that, putting that in piece, the complexities of the airflow of 100 kmph and tightening a particular screw to the existing structure can be a challenging task. It's indeed an engineering marvel.
Excellent.
And if you see the kind of base that has been constructed where for the attachments of the rocky formations, it's quite huge. It's seeing itself is heartening that in India we are thinking and we are building those kind of things. And it's a compliment to the civil engineers who have constructed that.
So I have one question on these transformative projects, like you mentioned the high-speed rail and others. So these are all transformative, but they obviously cost a lot of money. So how are they decided that whether a transformative project, suppose something in the Northeast, suppose you want to just fill up the Northeast wherever it's possible with good quality railways on bridges and on high, corridors which are on pillars or whatever. I'm just thinking aloud. So these transformative projects you think are good for the railways or incremental ones are good?
See, as I said, now we are in an aspirational mode. Technology-wise, ability-wise, financial capability-wise, the country is self-sufficient in terms of all these things. And this incremental approach won't work. Uh, for example, as I said, that the high speed and dedicated freight corridor are connecting to Northeast. For many years, we were unconnected. Now you have connected the Kashmir Valley. You have connected most of the capital cities of the Northeast area. But still a lot of things have to be done because it's a very, very difficult terrain, hilly terrain. The climatic conditions are not conducive. There are frequent earth slides are there, which makes construction a challenging task in that area.
So what was that COVID experience?
COVID experience was tough, but I think that was one institution which kept the country's economy alive. Because while we had, but the best part was the freight. It continued. It continued to supply the whole chain, which is critical for the development of the country.
Nothing changed
Nothing
during
changed.
COVID on
No,
freight.
nothing changed. Because your ports were functioning. You had to evacuate the ports, thermal power stations, because you need power and energy. These two industry and mining, which are completely rail dependent. So
Right.
that is why if you look at the distribution in terms of the rail freight, 50% constitutes the coal movement. So on a day-to-day basis, the operational person in the railways will have on his tips that what is the coal balance at a thermal power station. Every day we monitor that what is the coal balance. If it is critical, then you will leave aside everything and pump in coal on a priority to the thermal power station. That's the first priority. Second, if you have a ports within your jurisdiction, you will track what are the shipments coming in. Because one simple ship arriving, you can imagine a 50,000 cargo coming in with a ship means that you have to evacuate. One train can only cater, I would say, if it's a bulk cargo in a ship of 50,000, a single train will move around, say, 4,000. So 4,000, if you have to evacuate 50,000, how many trains that are to be moved? So it's a every day. You can't sleep. It has to be a continuous process.
Very difficult job.
Yes. So you will have to keep a tap of the port movements, what are ships coming in, thermal power stations, how the cement industry is doing, how the iron ore mining is being done. So the operational guy within the railways will have on its tips what is going on in these industries and do their planning in terms of rolling stock management, evacuation, supplies, and interactions at a very day-to-day level.
Super. So I'm now finally come down to this question on outside India. So when India was under colonial control, then East Pakistan and West Pakistan were part of India. They also inherited the same thing as you initially said, that there was a Chittagong,
Chittagong, Karachi
Karachi zone, port and all that. So it was a significant part of the railways that side. So whatever legacy was left as regards infrastructure and culture and institution, all of that was equally available in both these countries. But we see all kinds of images in Bangladesh and Pakistan of trains which are, just overflowing with passengers. I don't know about their freight movement. So can you tell us why did they get left behind?
See, when the partition happened, because partition happened, then very, very small portion, say 7,000 odd kilometers was in the West Pakistan, which is today's Pakistan, East Pakistan or Bangladesh, which is roughly around 3,000 kilometers. So almost this 10,000 kilometer of network got divided into two portions, Pakistan and Bangladesh. And they did not have the economies of scale. They were part of the same network. And when the partition came, they did not have the resources that how to go about running this. Because at independence, we also inherited from the Britishers a rail system which was not modern. It was in a bad shape and used to pump in resources. We created institution for backward integration, forward integration, creating factories, manufacturing units, standards organization. Perhaps they did not do it. They had a small network, to be fair. At Bangladesh, you had the number of locomotives which were supplied to them over a period of time, and the inventory that they were required to keep for those locomotive spare was too high, which made a number of locomotives ineffective. They could not keep those kind of inventory. In our system, perhaps, as I said, that we created CLW, we created diesel locomotive works and Chitranjan locomotive work, and kept on manufacturing the same type of loco for next 20, 25 years till modernization phase came up and you started experimenting with technologies or private investments. But in their case, to improve on the network, was all aid based. Whoever gave the money, it came with certain kind of a technology tie-ups, and you had number of technologies which they were not able to handle.
So too much inventory and too many different technologies.
Different technologies.
They could not consolidate.
They could not consolidate.
So both West and East
So
Pakistan.
Bangladesh, I believe now, has undergone a reform. They are putting a lot of investments. ADB is doing a lot of work there in terms of their upliftment. Pakistan, I believe, is not that doing that well because and it's in a bad shape.
The railways is not growing as fast. So final question on this new thing that all of us travel in is metro rail. So metro rail is a very new concept and it became very famous after Delhi started getting its rail and now it's all over everywhere. So can you tell us something about the metro rail? What is the big thing about it? Then I believe recently an organization has been created for externalizing India's metro capabilities.
See, the metro development started when it came out of the, I would say, shadow of the railways. Initially, say, Mumbai, Chennai, Kolkata, they were suburban systems with the railways. And when the Delhi metro debate was going on in this country, it was a big subject that whether it is part of the railways or not outside it. And I think it was a sensible decision at that point of time to keep it outside the railways. Because any city-based transportation, you need to have a big involvement of the local administration, which is the state and the city. Because none of these metro networks can be a very profitable business unless a real estate is made part of it. Property development, real estate. So any metros, if you look at Hong Kong, Singapore, London, Paris, you have created shopping malls at station. So those kind of transit-oriented developments can only come if the state administration is part of such projects. And that is how Delhi Metro was successful. And when it became successful, today roughly around 20 odd cities in India are having either metros or are planning metros or thinking in terms of having a metro development. Delhi Metro was a pioneer with starting now almost roughly around 480 or 490 kilometers of network is there with them, which makes them one of the biggest in the world in terms of operations. Their operations cost and maintenance cost is one of the lowest globally. No other metros have that kind of a low operation and maintenance cost as the Delhi Metro. And recently, rightly so, I would say, because the operation and maintenance is a big business where global companies are aspiring to because now you have moved away from a construction era to a operation and maintenance for 15 years, 20 years, 30 years. So we started having a specialized organizations for operation and maintenance for those long years. Okay. So that segregation in construction, that means implementing of project and doing operation and maintenance. It was earlier on the European system was always there. Segregation between operations and infrastructure, but it started coming up in India as well. And this organization, Delhi Metro International Limited, which has been formed, which is again one of the aspirations of the government. We are looking at international projects, and if it succeeds with the support of the government and on its capability, then I think it will bring a revolution.
So Indian Metro is now, its technology and its ability to create these metro systems is going overseas.
Yes.
Great. Excellent. So this was a fascinating conversation. Thank you, Mr. Mathur. And you took us from the 1830s to a sudden jump in the 1850s and 60s. And then you took us up to 1947. And then after, it's been a fascinating ride. I've learned a lot. Thank you so much. I think I can take the UPSC exam also.
Thank you, Sophie, for inviting me over. And it was a very enjoyable conversation.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Sophie.